we think of Israel as more than just a place. It's part of our identity, and we're lucky to be a part of one of the most passionate and Zionist communities anywhere in the world. In fact, when visitors come here, when Israelis come here, when other Jewish people from around the world come here, they're blown away by the depth of commitment and passion that exists in our community. It's as if Israel is around the corner, not on the other side of the world. And what that means is that, on the one hand, we're very fortunate because there's a living, breathing Zionist essence to who we are and how we are. But it also means that when Israel is in pain, when Israel is suffering, as it is right now, we are in pain. It's as if our family is suffering, as if a part of us is suffering along with Israel. And we see this in the way that our community has shown up in the 6 months since October 7th, in the way that we have come together, the way we have united, the way that we have expressed our collective grief and sorrow, but also our solidarity and our passion for Israel. And we see it through the amazing, vibrant tapestry that we are the custodians of, through the 9 Zionist youth movements, through our wonderful Jewish day schools, through the hundreds of young Australians who have travelled to Israel on various Israel programs, through the many organisations who've come alive during this time and have had so many different events and initiatives and activities, through the grassroots activists and volunteers who've come out in droves and really brought our community a whole new dimension. There's some music now playing in the background, which we might want to stop. And also, we've seen this in the hundreds and hundreds of Australians who've chosen to go to Israel, notwithstanding it being a wartime, whether as individuals or as groups, on missions, on delegations, to volunteer, to give, to show solidarity. And it's quite remarkable if you think about this depth of passion and the fact that we have a packed room here tonight, a room of passionate Jewish Australians who have come out of their way on a rainy Melbourne night to be here to hear stories from Israel beyond the headlines. And really, the intent of tonight was to be able to bring the heart and soul of Israel into this room through the guidance of some really meaningful leaders and activists in our community who've just returned from Israel, who've seen it firsthand, who are able to guide us through their stories, through their encounters, through the humans that left a lasting impression on them, into what's going on in Israel, what is it like in Israel beyond the headlines. And it's a great honour really to introduce these 4 amazing leaders. Moran Dvir is an activist, she's a philanthropist, and she's a social entrepreneur really, who has been one of the co-founders of one of the most inspiring group of grassroots activists that our community has known in Project Aid, an organisation that has coordinated hundreds of volunteers across hundreds of different initiatives and really added a dimension to our ability to advocate, to activate and to mobilise people across our community. So Moran has just returned from the Australian Jewish Funders Trip, and it's a real honour to welcome Moran. Welcome, Moran. We've also got Andy Leibler with us, who is the co-president of Emunah. And Emunah, since 1935, has been supporting families at risk all across Israel, supporting infants, supporting youth, supporting the elderly. And Andy has been doing some remarkable work with Emunah and has just come back from an Emunah mission where she saw some of the remarkable work that this organisation does. So welcome, Andy. We've got Adam Krongold, who is a creative, a tech investor, and a social activist, and a massive Zionist. As you can see by his top, which says Elyon, which is directly from Shenkin. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And Adam has been on many, many different boards, has invested in a lot of creatives and activists and tech entrepreneurs in both Israel and Australia, and has also just returned from the Australian Jewish Funders mission. So welcome, Adam. And finally, Lillian, who is known to so many in the room as just an absolute powerhouse, a feminist, a Zionist, a philanthropist, and just an all-round awesome humanist. So welcome, Lillian. And what I'd like to do is really start with this notion of deciding to go to Israel despite there being a war. And if we said this to the average person in the street, they'd say, well, why wouldn't you wait until the war is over? There's an apparent risk. We know that there are various warnings against going there. I'm curious, what is it that made you go to Israel during a conflict? And maybe if we start with Adam.
The short answer was hugs and hummus. I just wanted to go to Israel and let them know that Australia was thinking about them, thinking about Israelis with our hearts, with our minds every day. We're praying for the return of hostages and we're praying for peace. And I got my chance to do that, and I said that, I repeat that over and over and over again. I had some taxi drivers in tears, which was heartening to know that they felt it. Besides that, I went to do for Israel more and what I could do better. And conversely, I wanted to see what I could potentially bring back to Australia to help the art and creative Jewish industries here, and then also anything I could do with regard to mental health, bring it back to Australia as well.
Thank you. Moran, how about you?
I'm not sure if this is on.
It will go on automatically.
Okay. I think for me, since October 7, I just had a really deep ache to be in Israel. I couldn't really explain it, except I just needed to be there. And, you know, like many of us, I kind of got into a rabbit hole after October 7, and it's just consumed my whole life and changed everything for me. And it's a moment in time, it's history, and I felt like that it would be a really necessary part of my journey and experience as we move through it to go and see and hear. And like Adam, I also had a really strong desire to express my gratitude to Israelis, which I got to do over and over again. That they put their lives on the line, they sent their children to fight for us as well. And that was an amazing experience, but also funny because every time I would say thank you to an Israeli, they'd say, well, thank you for being here, you've come all the way, and just kind of went back and forth. But yeah, it was amazing.
Thanks, Moran. How about you, Andy?
I think before I went, I didn't really quite appreciate or know exactly why I was going. It was a whole combination of these things that everyone's been saying. I wanted to bear witness, I wanted to give a hug to friends and family, I've been working with people very closely in Emwana for a long time, and I know that, like you said, Emwana supports the most vulnerable in Israeli society, so when you have people in a crisis, and you add another crisis onto that, I knew that I needed to see what Emwana was doing if I was going to be trying to fundraise or help them, I had to see what was happening on the ground. But ultimately now I can say that I think I just went for me, because I just made me feel better. I needed to be there. I can't even articulate exactly what.
Can you all hear me if I don't use a microphone?
Yeah.
I always want to be in Israel, so for me that was, it's just another excuse really, but I felt very nervous, to be honest, about going to Israel. A few people I know left to go quite early. They were in Israel last year in November, December, and my sort of nerves around going was, you know, who am I to go and bear witness, you know, from my white, privileged, relatively safe Australia to come and see other people's tragedies, and I think Moran said, you know, ambulance chasing, or is it kind of, you know, trauma porn, going to see that. So I had a real kind of thing, bee in my bonnet about that, and was very unsure about whether there was a need to do that, even though I had also thrown myself into a bit of advocacy after October 7, but being there was completely different. And I've been saying the same thing. Most of the people in the room have been to Israel, and you know when you go to Israel, no one really cares if you're there. Your family don't really make such a big deal. They don't really change their plans. They're like, oh, the cousins are here, whatever. That was not the case. People were so overwhelmingly grateful, it was almost uncomfortable. You know, looking into your eyes, like you've flown into a war zone. It felt like a much bigger deal for the people there that we came than it felt for us. And like Andy said, absolutely felt better. I mean, it was difficult to get into some of the things that we experienced while we were there, but having been there and come home, the real sense that it's still there with all its problems and flaws and complications, but it's still a thriving, crazy place that, you know, we can call home. So probably selfishly that was also a reason, just to see that it's actually there in a way that we know and love.
So I'm curious, is there anything that surprised you when you got there? Anything that was unexpected, or anything that was particularly unusual that you noticed?
When I first arrived, I thought, oh, everything feels the same, and that surprised me. And I was like looking at everyone's faces, just looking for the signs of a war. And the day that I landed, I went out with a relative, and he took me. We walked through Tel Aviv for a few hours, and it was bustling and busy, and there was, you know, people in restaurants and bars, and it was just felt normal. And then he kind of pointed out a lot of things along the way that you know were different. So there's Israeli flags everywhere. There's a lot of signs in Hebrew. You know, we'll win together. There's all the hostage posters. So I think what surprised me was that it felt kind of normal, and that people were going out and living their lives, but then there's still this kind of subdued backdrop to everything.
Anyone else?
Normally when I'm in Israel and people say, where are you from? You say Australia, and they go, oh, far away, very expensive, blah, blah, blah. This time it was, as Moran said, and everyone sort of said, thank you so much for coming. And that really was incredible to, you know, to hear that. And it felt like there was an understanding of the importance of the diaspora. I would also tell them what was happening in Australia, in Melbourne, and they couldn't believe it. And I think there was that understanding that we both have something going on, we're in this together, and we need to help each other.
So one of the things that's wonderful is that in every journey we take, there are always certain people that stand out, certain experiences that leave a lasting impression. And I asked each of you to think of who is that for you. And so starting with Moran and working our way down, I'd love to hear the stories, the people who really left their lasting impact on you.
I think for me, it is really a blend of people, or a blend of the same story. But the one story that I'll share, which you know, you could probably repeat in many different variations. On Saturday I went to lunch at my auntie's house, and my younger cousin, who she's like a youth social worker, she was there, and I knew that she had a young woman living with her. And when I say young woman, she's like 20 or 21. Her name is Tully, and Tully also is a youth worker, but obviously she's you know, younger. And Tully's from kibbutz near Oz, and after October 7, she moved in with my cousin in her apartment in Tel Aviv. My cousin's got a baby and her husband. She stayed with her for a few months, and we were having lunch together, and I knew a little bit about her story. I knew that she'd been in a safe room for 15 hours, and obviously it was one of the kibbutzim that was very badly massacred. And we were sitting talking, and Tully made a comment, something about, oh, but it's Saturday. And my other cousin leaned over and said to me quietly, every Saturday, Tali wakes up at 6 in the morning and she vomits because she has trauma. And we learnt a new phrase, which is it's not PTSD, it's just acute trauma that they're still in. No one's moved past anything. And she's a beautiful young girl, the same age as my oldest daughter. She gets up every day and she goes to her job. She tries so hard. She's moved out of my cousin's house. She's living with some other young people. And that story just really struck me because she's broken, but she gets up every day and she tries. And there's also an incredible safety net and support system around her. And that was just something we kept seeing. So on the one hand, you just hear these heartbreaking stories of trauma, and then a minute later you would hear how businesses or people in the community had stepped in to support them in the most incredible ways. So it's, yeah, I think for me it was the trauma and resilience together.
Thanks, Moran. There's some images on the screen as well. I'd love for you to just talk us through what are we seeing.
So, the picture of my Apple Watch, when I was in Israel, I put an app on my phone, which I think nearly every Israeli has, which I can't remember what it's called, Sohar, or I don't know, something like that, and it gives you alerts every time there's, rockets, and you can set it to your location, but for mine, anytime, there was a rocket alert. And I kept taking photos every time it would go off, and I've still got it on my phone, so it goes off while I'm here. And it was just a reminder that, I'm wearing my gym leggings, I've gone for a walk in the morning, and there it goes. Someone in Israel has had to run into a bomb shelter. And that just really, just a reminder of what Israelis are dealing with that we often don't hear about here. The other two pictures are of a bomb shelter in the south. It's a bomb shelter right next to Kibbutz Be'eri, and on that day, on October 7, the bomb shelter is meant to fit 10 people, and on that day, 40 young people were crammed inside to try and hide from Hamas. Most of them were murdered. They were very young people. The ones that survived because people protected them with their bodies or they were underneath. And it's now become, it's still a bomb shelter, but it's become a memorial. And these stickers that you see on the left are actually all over Israel. They're on bus shelters that, people just stick them up. And, they're just beautiful young people in the prime of their life. And yeah, again, that's just the sign of the scale of trauma that is in Israel is just so overwhelming, and that's just one little story, one sign.
Thanks, Moran. Andy, tell us about some of your stories.
So I have it's very hard to find one, because it was probably about 5 a day. But I had a few different interactions with Chayalim that have really had a profound impact on me. And before I went, I said to a few people, I need to give them something. When I see the soldiers, what can I give them? And there was an overwhelming response that I had to take them cigarettes. Yeah. So in my head, I knew this sounded weird, but I stopped in Dubai and I bought a few cartons of cigarettes and I shut them with me. And then when I got there, we made a barbecue for a few hundred soldiers up north. And from far as they started walking to us, they looked like these big, strong soldiers. And as they came closer, and I saw their faces, I'm like, oh my God, these are kids. Yeah. These are kids. These are not much older than my kids. I was like, they're not getting the cigarettes. But it hit me because they were their faces were so soft and they were so polite and they were so sweet, and they asked us so many questions about why we came. And all I could think about was how these soldiers are painted in the media. The IDF soldiers are the villains, and they were anything but. And this story continued because the next day we went to Har Herzl, And that's what that photo is from. And for those of you who don't know what Har Herzl is, it's the national cemetery where all of the Israeli leaders and anyone that's died serving Israel gets buried. It's a beautiful cemetery overlooking Jerusalem. And again, we saw a group of soldiers who had just been released from Gaza, and they were coming to visit the graves of their friends because they couldn't make it to their funerals because they were in Gaza. And then, you know, you look at them from the back and they're these big strong men, and then they turned around and they wanted to tell us the stories of their friends who they were coming to visit. And you can just see in their eyes that they'd seen stuff that nobody should have seen. And I couldn't stop looking at them and thinking like what they'd seen and what they'd been through. And I wanted to tell a couple of the stories that we heard that day at Har Herzl about some of the soldiers, because for me, they, you know, at first they just names in the newspaper, this many fallen soldiers on this day, or they list their names, or, you know, they were just names on the grave sites. But we heard a few stories that day, and I thought I'd just very quickly tell a couple to honour them. So one was of a boy, 21-year-old, his name's Yoron Chitiz, and he lived with his mum in Ranana. He was the youngest of 5 children, and he was serving in Gaza for 80 days. He came back to visit his family, and he surprised his mum. There was this amazing reunion, and I didn't know when I heard the story, but afterwards I know that I'd seen the videos. It was all over social media of him surprising his mum and excitement. And then he went back into Gaza that week and he was killed. And he had a girlfriend, her name was Dara. He was about to propose to her. He loved soccer, he loved making barbecues, he loved singing Zmirot on Shabbos. And there's a thing in his community now, because when he came back for that Shabbat, he said to everyone, how is it that on Shabbat we sing the Zmirot in Gaza louder than you're singing here? Like, you all look so pained. And now there's a thing in his community that every Shabbos they sing one more song for Yoron. One more quick person that I wanted to mention. And her name was Rose. What's her surname? Lubin. And she was, Alyssa told us the story next to her gravesite, and that's her gravesite on the right. And she died a few months before her 21st birthday. She was a Chayal Boded, so she came from Atlanta, Georgia, and I don't remember all the details about her. She was a friend of Alyssa's daughter. And I do remember some of the things that stood out to me that were told about her, that she was very little, but that she was very powerful and very energetic, and she wore super bright colours everywhere. She had coloured hair and coloured socks, and her life dream was to make Aliyah and to serve the Israeli army, and she died protecting her people. And there was, which is what I've got here, there is a quote that she had, that they printed on bracelets that they gave out at her funeral, and it said, and this was a favourite quote of hers, which said, "To look for comfort is part of the human condition, but we grow from discomfort." And I love that, because she obviously stepped out of her comforts to move to Israel, but I think it's a message to all of us to step out of our comfort zones and stand up for what we believe.
Thanks so much, Andy, for sharing these powerful stories. There's one more story as well of what we've got here on the left.
Hearing from me, because that went for a bit longer than I intended. This was an amazing story, because it epitomises the peoplehood and the connections that you feel with everyone. So it was at the end of the day where we were down south and we visited. It was, it wasn't an easy day, because we heard so many stories of survivors from Dvir. It was down south, and stories from people in Sderot and people who were fighting the terrorists, survivors. And we were about to get on our bus, and a group of locals who had just moved back to Sderot came to ask us what we were doing there, and like what Adam said, they were so emotional, so excited, so grateful that we'd come, even though in the same breath they're telling us how they fought the terrorists with their own hands, and then pulled out their cameras, because everyone wants to tell their story. Everyone has a story to tell, and they pulled out their cameras and showed us the terrorists that were in their building and how their neighbours fought them and protected them. And before they could finish telling us their sentence, they said, "It's our 3-year-old's birthday party right now, and you have to join us." And we were like, "No, we're on a tight schedule, we've got to get on the bus," but there was no taking no for an answer. And we joined the party, and we danced, and there weren't many people there because not many people have returned to Sderot, but we stayed for about an hour, and we ate their food. They made us eat a lot of food. We sang and we cried, and they videoed us and we videoed them, and it felt like I was at my family's birthday party.
You'll recognise this. This is Dizengoff Square, Dizengoff Fountain. You'll see photos, flags, tchotchkes, soft toys, pictures of people, letters, poems, and affirmations. This is Shabbat. The feeling wasn't one of grief. It was one of acknowledging. It's hard to explain. It wasn't a monument per se. It was almost saying that these people had amazing life, and this is what it was. There were people sitting around talking, laughing, playing music, drinking, eating, just sort of relaxing around there, enjoying the warmth of the day. I was there with my friends Emily and Ohad and their 3 beautiful children, Inbar, Alon, and baby Nave. And if you change the photo, this is me showing them how to play Pokemon. And you can see that just in the back, the ubiquitous posters of the hostages, which is on everyone's hearts and minds and wanting them to come home safely. And this is, this is what the country wants. But you can see, it's what Israel does best. Doesn't matter what's going on, life goes on, and life has to go on. And you acknowledge the hard times, you deal with it, and you still move forward. It's incredible. The other story, actually, and literally there was so many stories, and I said to Alon earlier, this should be a lecture series. He sort of kiboshed that immediately. And if you have any more questions, I have so many stories, but on the very last day, I got into the car to go to the airport, and I started chatting with the driver, and I like asking questions, and his name was Yoni Kraus, and he started to tell me his story, and he was the eldest of 15 children. He was from B'nai Brak. He was the golden child. He had his shidduch all ready to go, and at the age of 20, he realized there was something more. And he walked out. He said to his parents he's leaving, and he was shunned by his family and his community, but he knew there was more. He went out, he got a job, he had to do a bridging course, and he did, because he'd never done any secular studies before. He went to Bar-Ilan University, he graduated. He is proud of his achievements, and at this point we're getting closer to the airport. I tell him to slow down because there's more of the story, and I don't want to leave. And he says he always has an open heart. It doesn't matter what's going on, he always has an open heart. And we get to the airport, and before he gets out of the car, he shows me this photo. So he left when he was 20, and this was late last year when he was 27. He just turned 28. And you see him here in the blue, where he has been invited back to the family and back to the community because he had the open heart. Doesn't matter what was going on, he continued on with his life, and with faith and with hope and with a lot of action, he's able to fulfill his life and still have his family and community. And that was very much, an Israel moment for me to realize that. And it's such an incredible country, really.
So this was, I also arrived on a Friday, and on the Saturday I went out for dinner with a few friends, and they said, well, we have to do what all Tel Aviv people do on a Saturday night, and that's go to the protests. So you're coming to the protests, here's a flag. So I went to the protests, and it was quite an extraordinary experience, and I wanted to share a little bit about it because I know it's a bit controversial to talk about going to protests when you're not a local, and you know, it's not the country that I send my children to fight in the army for. If you could hear the sound, why I chose that particular clip is because although there was lots of shouting and lots of screaming and lots of controversial speeches and maybe some less controversial, at the end everyone sings Hatikva. And they do that at the end of every protest, which they've resumed now in earnest in the last couple of months. And to me, what was so fascinating about that experience is who's there at the protests. And it's mostly people who are, well, not mostly, very, very Zionist. That might even be my
It's your daughter.
Where are you, Mum? Very, very Zionist people, and a lot of them are calling on the government to do more about the hostages. So that's one sort of group of people that were there. And a lot of people are there obviously criticising the Bibi Netanyahu government's handling of things. But what was really clear, and I spoke to so many people and I asked them what they were thinking and what they were feeling and what they were doing there, and they want to tell you. And they really made it clear that it's not Bibi's war as far as they're concerned. They really say, this is our war. This is our children who are going to the army. There were people who had been in Gaza who'd come back. It's people who had been touched by, every single person that you speak to in Israel literally is touched by the tragedy. If we feel connected, that's how every single person when you're there feels. So I agree, when I first arrived, and it's Friday, I went to the shuk and it's mad and everyone's getting ready for Shabbat and people are drinking and eating, and you sit down and it's quite festive. But then you start listening to people's conversations, or you ask them a question and everybody is talking about the same thing. And it's not necessarily the food. The food's just a given how good the food is, but it's about like a hostage story, or that the government didn't do this or the government did do that. And so I want to frame it in a positive. While there was a real anger that you felt about the government, there was real pride that where the government had failed, the community and civil society had really banded together to do things. Everything that you saw was an amazing story of the community coming together, all elements of the community, or most elements of the community. That's the next. So it's a bit out of order, that's right. Couldn't remember. So this was this is the Nova Music Festival site, which everybody knows what happened the morning of the October 7th. Terrorists came over the border in paragliders and also breached the fences. And I wasn't aware that it was I thought it was random. What I had understood before I got to Israel was that the terrorists just came upon these music festival goers, and that couldn't have been further from the truth. What we learned was that the Hamas terrorists so meticulously planned the attack that they knew that people who were going to a dance party, that 6 and 6:30 is the peak hour for kids to be out of their tents and on the dance floor, dancing, as the sun came up. And I think why that impacted me so much is, my 20s and my 30s and maybe even some of my 40s. This is what I used to do every single weekend. And I don't know if you can see, but it's eucalyptus trees, it's gum trees. It looks very Australian. So you walk around and it could be Australia. And you look at the faces and it's your friends, it's your family, it's your daughters, it's your sons. It was so like just the birth lottery that it's not me or someone I know or my kids. This is what my kids do now. And it's become a site now of tributes, and you can see each person has different sort of churches, to your point, Adam, around the base, and people are praying, some people are dancing, and while you're walking around you can actually hear the booms. And what did they tell us, Moran? Oh, but they're the big ones. It's our booms, because you can hear the explosions. You're so close to to the border, and there's a tent that has been set up, and just it so happened that the day we were there, one of the young men who'd been killed at the festival, his parents had paid for a brand new Sefer Torah to be written in his name, and the sofer was there inscribing the letters and writing out the Torah, and people could come and either make a donation and ask for 1 or 2 letters or a word to be written in honour of this young man who had died at the festival. And I did ask, was he a religious, boy? And they said no, he wasn't. And I thought that was just another really interesting thing, that people are now connecting to their Judaism and their kind of Jewish heritage and traditions in a way that possibly they hadn't until this time. So this is a photo of Tel HaShomer, the Sheba Hospital, which we went to visit, and it's one of the largest hospitals in Israel, and they received a number of the hostages. They received a number of the hostages who, the returnees, they called them. They said they didn't want to call them hostages. And we went to visit the hospital, and we met with this amazing young psychologist, youngish psychologist by the name of Nama. She was the head of the trauma unit there, and she said, she started her talk with the question, what's the protocol for a 3-year-old who is being returned after 63 days in captivity? And we all had that reaction. We sort of looked at each other, and she said that's exactly the question that we had to ask ourselves, because there hadn't been textbooks written about how to treat a 3-year-old who'd been kept in probable darkness. And so she told us the story about what they did to prepare. They weren't even sure if the hostages were going to be released, but what they did in order to write the protocol for conditions like that. And over a period of weeks before the first return of the child hostages and some of the grown-up hostages, they would role play with actors every possible scenario of what might happen when the people returned were returned to the families and hospitals. And one thing that they really focused on was the first words that they would say, and Kylie remembers, it was like, "We're so glad you're here, we've been waiting for you, and welcome home." And even every single word was really chosen really, really carefully. And I mean, I have to bring a feminist lens to it. It was so amazing how many incredibly powerful women we met who were really taking charge of not just organising civil society, but really dealing with so much healing. Because now that's what's happening, is like a rebuilding of people's like quite literally shattered hearts. And we saw another woman who we all really were so impacted by. Her name was Zohar. And she was one of the, I think she was a social worker, but she ran the kibbutz, Kibbutz Redim, also on the border, one that was really terribly, terribly impacted. Dozens, I think they said they had 60 or 70 Hamas terrorists, and the people who were on guard at the kibbutz had 7 rifles to hold off 70 terrorists, and a lot of the people who were fleeing the Nova Festival had descended also on this kibbutz. It was a terrible, terrible massacre. And this woman got up to tell us the story about the incredible fighting off of terrorists, and how even though people had been killed, that the community itself, a community of lefties and real peaceniks, how what they wanted was to stay together. So after they evacuated the kibbutz and they put them in a hotel in, I think, Eilat, they said it was terrible. They, a few days in the hotel, they decided that they wanted to not be in a hotel, but they wanted to relocate altogether. So they relocated almost 500 members of this particular kibbutz, driven by this amazing woman, Zohar, and the leadership of the kibbutz. They found an apartment building that was not quite finished, but close to finished, in the south of Tel Aviv. And again, civil society stepped in. Venture capital fund out of America, philanthropy out of America, business leaders in Israel, and even some government officials, to fast track the permits, which are notoriously a nightmare in Israel, to get this apartment building finished. and the entire kibbutz community, or 95% of the community, moved into this vertical, like they said, it's the first vertical kibbutz in Israel. And she just told story after story that really stayed with me, and a few of the things that she said really resonated. And one of them was, on October 7, two major areas of trust were broken. The first being the trust that the Israeli people had between themselves and the government. She said, we're hippies, we're in the south, but we send our kids to the army and we all participate and we pay tax because there's an unwritten rule that the government protects us. That's why we give our kids, that's why we go to the army, that's why we live the way we live. And when we realised the tragedy on October 7 that no one was coming, the trust was broken. She said that was the first major trust that was broken. And then she spoke really powerfully about the second trust that was broken, and she said that this one's going to be harder to repair. And she said that's the trust that children have of their parents, that their parents are there to protect them, that when scary things happen, the parents will chase away the monsters, and that when their parents are there, bad things don't happen. And she said, and that trust was broken because our kids were there with their parents, and the worst horrors happened. And how we will rebuild the trust of our children is what she's concerned with. And she said, she also was very proud but also angry. She said the government wants us to go back, relocate back to our kibbutz, which we loved. And she said, after Auschwitz and the concentration camps, communities did rebuild, but they rebuilt elsewhere. They rebuilt communities in Israel and in Australia and in Europe. And she said, we're being asked to rebuild our communities on the sites of the massacres. And she said, it's impossible. And she said, whilst they want to go back, she said, how can we? So her stories really resonated, and also, I connected with it because I also, she's a real lefty, and that's always been kind of my belief as well, that for the whole idea of the two-state solution, and of course we believe in peace. And she said, she was angry. She said, 95% of our lives were idyllic. 95% of our lives were perfect. My husband's a farmer, we're farmers, we toil the land, our kids, run around and have the most wonderful lifestyle, but 5% of it was terrible. 5%, there's rockets coming and we are in shelters. And she said, we never should have accepted that 5%. 100%. We never should have accepted it. That's on us, and that really stayed with me as well.
Thank you to each of you for just some absolutely incredible stories, and we can, it's obvious why they stuck with you, but I feel like so many of them will now stick with people in this room after tonight. I want to invite anyone who would like to ask the panel some questions to put up their hand, and you can ask it of a specific member of the panel or of all the panelists. It's entirely up to you. If you'd like to ask some questions, yes?
This is quite a difficult one. I was in Israel in January and my cousin was killed in kibbutz Dvir. I know my cousin Danny, his sister, is taking groups through. But I know there's lots of people, especially in the kibbutzim and find it really difficult. People coming to their homes, people, it's quite often unburied, there's still people living there. And I know lots of people are finding it very difficult that people are coming in almost, somebody said like a Hollywood ghoul tour. And I'm wondering how we manage that, how we manage people's pain by going to visit, because my sister's here now, she's from Russia and Croatia, she's been evacuated for 6 months now. She can't go back obviously, then we're told probably not till next July. But I don't know how we manage that. I understand where people are coming from. Jeff, my cousin, says, look, it's important for me to take people around because they feel they need that experience. And the exposure is important. At the same time, these people's lives.
I'm happy to answer that. Tully, the young woman that I mentioned, she was saying how Israelis were just turning up to her kibbutz and were just coming in and having a look around without permission, and when they were asked, and going into people's homes, and when they were asked to leave, they refused, and just obviously really, rubbish people, and she said, I know they're a minority, but she got really emotional talking about it. We could just see it was, just felt so like disempowering for her that people were coming through her home. And personally, we went through kibbutz Dvir. We happened to be in a rush, and it felt terrible to be running through. And a lot of it is being patched up, so all the bullet holes and all the kind of stuff that we saw months ago isn't there anymore. There's a few, burnt out houses. I personally think it's probably enough of people coming through, because people do need to, in some way rebuild, and, God knows if they want to go back and live there or not. It will probably be a mix, but I think, with social media and all the, kind of influencers and celebrities that have come through, enough people have seen it. And, they just need, I guess, their space to, there's not so much to look at anymore,
Can I say something too? I was super nervous to go down south because I'd heard that as well. And I'd given a brief to the organisers that were organising our mission, World Emuna, that we don't want to go down south if they don't want us. We don't want to go to kibbutz Dvir. We don't want to perv on anybody's pain. We want to go and do what they want, and we don't need to go there unless they want us. And she said to me, I respect that. You're going to sound like Penny Wong if you don't go down south, but I respect what you're saying. And
Jeff is furious with her. Furious.
Are you Galit's cousin? So we must have some connections. My brother-in-law's Julian Cappy is also Galit's cousin.
Okay, of course.
We'll connect up.
Julian's from mum's side, from the married side. I want you to know
we're all connected.
I want you to know that I visited her father, Simon, who's 91. His parents were killed by the Nazis in France. So he's buried he didn't have a chance to bury his parents. And then he had to bury his daughter.
So sorry. We met Jeffrey there too when we went to Berry, and the man that took us around Berry, he hadn't really taken a group around Berry before, and I felt like he wanted to tell his story. So I think it's got to be one of those, you play each situation as it is. He did tell us, there's certain places that we aren't going to go, and we aren't going to go into people's homes, and things like that. But when we bumped into your cousin Jeffrey, he was like, "Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to take you around."
I know, he's happy to take the floor.
Yeah. So I think it's.
He's on Sky right now.
He is, that's right.
He's on Sky News with Sharbury right now.
They were born in Australia, so he's as great as the people that have been used.
Yeah. So I was really worried about that as well, and I was worried what I was going to say to them. And I have a whole lot of family who live in Israel that said they didn't feel comfortable going down south. And I felt weird about that. I'm like, who am I to fly in and go down south and then not do it? But when I was there, I felt like it was the right thing. And I felt like they wanted us, people that were taking us, wanted us to be there.
I think also if you want to go down there, there's so many opportunities. People want to tell you their story. And when we visited a couple of the hospitals, they told us that as a group we were too big to go and visit with the soldiers. One of the things that we were going to do was speak to soldiers, and we did that at a function instead, a social function. And the psychologists who are looking after the returned soldiers said that it's part of their therapy is to tell the story. And so they wouldn't put us in front of soldiers who didn't want to tell us what had happened to them. And actually, one of the videos that I was going to use, but I thought almost felt too personal. We went to a function one night in some fancy place, a house someone lived there, and he put on a function for us with a bunch of soldiers who had just come back and had been severely injured. And I don't know if I've told my dad the story, but I sat with this soldier who had no legs. His name was Amitai. He was 21. He finished his service last January, and with his friends went straight to South America.
and they came back from their trip literally on October 6th, dropped their bags at home and went out to a party in Tel Aviv all night, took drugs, came back in the morning, he said about 5 o'clock in the morning, and you know, they were all just sitting around at his parents' place in Ramat Garden in Hamak Mid Street, which is where my dad grew up. Unbelievable. And then their phones started blowing up, and all of them had literally just finished their service, but he said they all did the same thing. They, you know, showered, put on some clothes, got in their cars and drove down to their bases, and so they weren't even ordered to do anything at this stage yet, and in the first few days of battle he was severely injured. And now he's all over social media doing like crazy training and you know, doing, you know, ridiculous feats of strength on his arms and just beyond belief. And I promise you this guy looks injured, doesn't look well, and all he was talking about was, can you get me some more sushi, and I want a beer, and you know, what are you guys doing here from Australia? And just the spirit of these people and these kids is just unbelievable. So visit.
More questions? I'd like to ask some questions.
Can I just add a comment to what they were saying about Berry?
Do you mind standing up?
Sorry, I was on a mission together with Dandy, and the young, beautiful father husband that took us around, who was a survivor. At the end of it, we were there for a few hours, and at the end of it, he actually thanked us for coming, which is what you've all spoken about. And he said, the reason I wanted you to come is so that you can go back to Australia and go back to Cruz and tell everybody about what's happened to us. So that's what I guess, you know, everyone's done now.
Alex.
Hi, thank you very much. Very informative. I'm wondering if you get a sense of what people know about what's happening around the world in terms of support for the people there. I mean, I think Adam said that they say to Australians what's happening with their anti-Semitism or whatever, but do you get a sense of the rest of how they feel about the world? And because for the first time maybe Israel and diaspora are in sync in some ways, which doesn't usually happen. So I'm wondering if you get that sense.
I was speaking with the Australian ambassador's wife, and she had no idea what it was like to be a Jewish creative in Melbourne. She was shocked. I made sure she knew what was going on. So I would say no. I mean, the people I spoke to couldn't believe it. Anti-Semitism in Australia.
Although we had a fairly short meeting with the President of Israel, and that was the first question he asked us, was what the hell is happening in Australia? So I think it depends, you know, who you speak to. And that was to your earlier question about what surprised me, was I completely forgot that there's no anti-Semitism in Israel. Like it feels different. Obviously they're dealing with some bigger issues, but that was surprising how here we're so on guard, fearful, and what we're talking about, and over there obviously not.
Yeah, so my mother just landed in Israel yesterday, and she sent me a photo of my uncle's car, which has huge posters of hostages that are children of friends of his, and they're all over his car. And the first thought that came to my mind is, if I drove my car with those images around Melbourne, it would be defaced, or worse, my car would be vandalised. And it's a stark reminder of we all have our problems, but there's just different realities, aren't there? Sure.
I just wanted to ask, why do you think that so many people want to share their story? Is it because the world just don't believe what happened? Is it because they've been so alone? Is it because they want you to bring it back? And you know, one thing that I keep on thinking about, and I know you can't make comparisons, but after the Shoah, there were so many people who just couldn't talk about it and never spoke about it. So why do you think it is that people feel this willingness to share?
I think there's a mixture of people. So I think the people that are talking to us are the people that want to talk, and I think they want to talk because it's a natural human reaction that talking is therapeutic. But there's definitely, I mean, we heard a lot of stories about people who haven't left their rooms, who have gone back to work, who aren't functioning. So I think there's a lot of things, you know, both sides happening. I think the people, the random people that we met who wanted to talk, felt that because we weren't there, it was, you know, everyone in Israel has their story of where they were and what happened and who they were connected to, and because we weren't there, I think it felt like they needed to share that with us as part of their, you know, feeling their pain and, you know, sharing their experience with us, being part of their family.
I'm a massage therapist as well. So when I was massaging in January, I just went from hotel to hotel massages for hours a day. And one time I had a guy named Herzl, 76 years old. He was from Sterot, and he came in. He put his head down, and he did not say a word. And following him was a guy who was 74. And as soon as he put his head down, he turned around and said, "Aren't you going to ask me a whole lot of questions? I want to tell you everything." And so I totally depended on that person, what they went through. We also had a woman who came in, she had a 6-week-old baby with her. She had a husband who hasn't got out of bed. He went to, also from Stillwater, he went to shul in the morning, he got shot at, wasn't injured, came back, went to bed and hasn't got up. Can't get out of bed. So she's got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old and a 6-week-old at home, and no husband because she can't get out of bed. So everyone's reactions depends on where they were, what they did, what they experienced. Just help them.
Yeah, a big problem that a few people said to me is school refusal and kids not wanting to go to school.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just curious upon your return, is there anything you've all been quite active, obviously, since October 7 and even in the Jewish community way before October 7? Is there anything as a diaspora community that you've come back thinking this would be really effective that you hadn't thought about before?
My take on the situation is there are so many different things going on now. Everything needs to start now, and some things are short term, some things are medium term, some things are long term. We don't know necessarily the right thing to do, but just do something. Do what you feel and feel good about doing it, and don't compare to anyone else and what everyone else is doing. I walked out of a talk on anti-Semitism at another event I was in because they immediately started talking about solution, without actually knowing what the problems are. So while we're actually trying to find what has happened, and you know, some of these long-term solutions might be 20 years down the track, just start something now. Whatever you feel is good, talk to someone who doesn't know the story and tell it, or anything you feel.
I think it's important, and I was kind of thinking about this before I left for Israel, and I was getting a bit frustrated by all the noise that we are distracted by. Not all of it is noise, but there's a lot of noise that we're distracted by, you know, the Clementine Falls and just dumb crap that doesn't make a difference. And we really have to use our energy resources mindfully and strategically. So, you know, we all have the same amount of hours in the day, or you know, however much you're going to donate, or however you want to make a difference. It either needs to be strengthening our community here or helping Israel. And we just need to, I guess, be conscious of not being sucked into rabbit holes that are unproductive and don't achieve either of those things, because it's very important to keep our community strong here, but we have got a really long road to help Israel in its recovery. It's not going to recover alone. It's on all of us. So I think, like, I agree with Adam, just do something, but now is the time that all of us need to be doing something, whatever it is.
I just want to add one more thing to that, Leora. It's a good question, and I've been obsessed with it. And what can we do? How do we do it better? And I really think the most important thing is to get people to Israel and to get non-Jewish people to Israel. Like, all of us, yes, for sure, but it was very, very clear, and it has been since October 7, the people who understand the situation, the people who have been the most sympathetic or empathetic or have written about it or talked about it or understood the situation with the nuance and, you know, the complications that are there are the people who've been to the Middle East.
Could I just say
I went on the mission with these amazing people, and I'm not Jewish, and that is the game changer, because the misinformation, the nuance, the complete change. I've been twice now, once before October 7, and I feel like it's changed my life. And now I can speak with some authority, and I can't be shut down because I actually have been. And it was just, I can't, so anyone that you can encourage, and that's what I'm going to be doing, is encourage.
So Kylie, I'm curious, what can we do to encourage more people who aren't Jewish to go to Israel? What do you see as the gap in what we could possibly do?
Why did you go?
Who said that?
What about why you went? What was your pull there?
Do you know, the first time I went because it was a holiday, and my husband's Jewish, but he had no connection really to much of the Jewish community. It was just, I really wanted to go to Israel. I thought it was a cool place, heard a lot about Tel Aviv, and just wanted to go. And it was all of that, but it was so much more. And I went on a mission, so we did, extraordinary things, and I learned more in that trip. I just kept thinking, why aren't we doing? And then I kept thinking about all the stuff that I'd heard, when you said about the IDF and what I thought in my head, and how not particularly proud I am of our military here, but if I had children there, I thought that would be so cool if they went into the army. All these things that just changed. And then I went after October 7 because I don't know, I feel like there's a part of me, I can't explain it, but it's just, and I'm struggling with my own friends here who are not Jewish, I'm from Brunswick originally, I'm very lefty, and it's really, really hard, but I know if people went, you can't not see what you're seeing. You can't see those young faces of those soldiers and think that they're monsters. You can't meet the people, and and the thing that kind of really annoys me is that the whole world's going to benefit. The fast tracking of the PTSD, the stuff that they're getting through. I'm a therapist. I can't believe what they're going to be doing, and we're all going to benefit from that. And it'll just be something else that Israel did. But we have to get more non-Jewish people there. I just think it's really important to witness it.
Thanks so much, Kylie. Thanks for sharing. For what it's worth, I think your courage in going there is inspirational, and I think it's on us to be able to create more friends and allies just like you. We're fortunate to be taking a mission in May with a number of non-Jewish leaders and business leaders, politicians, and I think it's through the first-hand experience, through creating those depth of understanding, relationships, and alliances that our community continues to thrive. So thank you.
I'm trying to understand the atmosphere in Tel Aviv you talk about on the Friday and Saturday and so on. We had a fantastic holiday in Israel in September last year. Israel was phenomenal, and Tel Aviv, best city in the world, and so you had people on the beach there for 4 weeks, and you had people from Australia, policemen from Bright in Victoria there, you happened to be there. So you had huge numbers of Arabs and just whole gamut in Tel Aviv, and you thought the place was booming. And the same, we went to Akko, wherever we went, it's obviously Yaakov, it was fantastic. And all the hotels, all the Arab workers and so on, and everyone was mates and hugging and everyone was friendly. So I'm trying to understand, when we go again, we'll go in October and so on, but when we go back again now, I can't imagine an atmosphere, we're all going to be festive sitting on the beach in Tel Aviv, and also have all languages come to society. So when we were there, it was just full of Israeli Arabs and others just on the beach, families talking, everyone's just with each other. And I can't quite get my head around it. Is that atmosphere there now, or will it come back, or is there, I thought there'd be huge tension.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to that because it's an area that the foundation that I work for Philanthropic Foundation particularly has an interest in funding shared society and Arab-Israeli initiatives. And to our delight at the foundation, in any case, a lot of those projects are still really thriving, and I think that there was some fear, and we heard it a few times from some of our speakers, from some of the people who spoke to us, that whilst there was a fear that the 20% of the population, the Arab population, would really side with Hamas, that in Israel that's not been happening, and in fact there's a real desire of the Arab community to integrate more. That's the story we heard, whether or not, you know, that's what we kept hearing a lot, and we had an incredible afternoon with a foundation that does numerous projects, particularly around universities. Obviously there are so many Arab students at the universities, and whilst there's been some challenges, you know, in terms of discrimination against some of the students, that there's a real desire to align themselves with Israelis, and they say that there's a doubling down of that, particularly in the philanthropic world, to support initiatives that are supporting coexistence. I'm not talking about the situation obviously in the West Bank or Gaza, but in Israel itself, that there's a real focus on that for now.
One of the nights I was catching up with a friend, she's vegetarian, and I had to find a restaurant that would suit her. So within the area that I was, there were like 15 or so little restaurants there, and the atmosphere was amazing. And my take on that is, I guess, Israeli resilience and the joy of life, and understanding that things are going to happen regardless. We might as well just enjoy it while we're getting on with it. You know, there was the discussions around what was going on was there while you were in a nice restaurant.
I felt the same. I felt like everywhere I went, I could see pain on people's faces, but it's this schizophrenic existence, I've used that phrase a few times, where people are feeling the pain, but they are also still celebrating life and living their life to, you know, continuing with their life, and not really, you know, I'm sure they've changed certain things that they're doing, but you don't feel it on the street. We were in Makane Yehuda on Thursday night, and it was packed. It was pumping. It was, we couldn't get a seat in it. We couldn't book a seat in a restaurant. So
I might share just two super quick stories about that. And I think obviously resilience in Israel is just was a huge part of our trip. There was a guy that spoke to us, and he must have been in his 40s, and he said in the second Intifada, you know, in Tel Aviv, that's when the terrorists were using bombs on buses, and he said in the morning, you know, I didn't take that bus, but the bus that left that I go to school with was attacked, and it blew up. And he said, and then in the afternoon we all got back on the bus and went home. And there one other thing, when Lil and I were walking on the TL one night, and there's like a memorial set up outside where the Dolphinarium nightclub was. It was an attack in 2001. I think about 21 young people were murdered. And I was telling my parents about it, and I was so emotional, because when you read the sign, it says, "We'll never stop dancing." And you know, we know that one of the, I guess, slogans after Nova was "We'll dance again," and it just broke my heart. I thought, how much can these people take? You know, and they're just not like us. You know, they're just incredibly resilient people, and I really think here we have a bit of a ghetto mentality, and we need to be a bit tougher and stronger and grittier, and we can take a leaf out of their book, because they just get up and get on with it because they don't have a choice.